Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar series, Tedstrom Talks. This is the 7th in a series of webinars that we are producing to give our clients, business associates, friends and family pertinent and important information on COVID-19 and other interesting and timely topics. Your videos and microphones have been muted. However, we plan to have a question and answer period at the end of the presentation, so please use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to ask questions throughout the presentation. I would like to introduce you to Peter Tedstrom, founder and chief advisor of Tedstrom Wealth Advisors. Peter has 35 plus years experience as a certified financial planner. He has been consistently recognized through awards and recognition and of the top or the country's top financial advisors. Peter, welcome.
Really thrilled to be here. This topic is one that's on a lot of people's minds since we've been dealing with COVID and coronavirus for, oh, God knows, it seems like 5 years, but it's, I guess, maybe more like 3 to 4 months. And I'd like to introduce, first of all, the company that Dale is with, the CEO of. It's called Global Gardian. And Global Gardian is a provider of world-class security solutions, custom tailored to the individual needs of its global client base. The company offers an integrated suite of best-in-class security services that help clients identify and mitigate the risks of traveling and doing business both overseas and domestically. Dale is the CEO of Global Gardian. He's also a 24-year U.S. Army veteran. He's a retired colonel. He has extensive intelligence, counterterrorism, and special operations experience. And listen to this, he's commanded 5 organizations, including an infantry reconnaissance platoon, Special Forces Scuba Team, Special Forces Counterterrorism Team, a Special Forces Counterterrorism Task Force, and Special Troops Battalion. Numerous combat and classified deployments including Iraq, Afghanistan, Kuwait, Colombia, Cuba, El Salvador, Chile, Panama, and Haiti. And he comes with a BS at Mansfield University, an MPA at Central Michigan, an MBA at TUI University, a master's certificate at Cornell, and the list goes on and on. We are just thrilled to have you here today, Dale, to talk about what it's going to be like to travel these days in the world of current COVID or post-COVID. I know you've got a lot of insight into that, so take it away, please, Dale.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. As we go through this, I've got a deck for you. I'm not going to try and PowerPoint you to death as we go through. We'll try and spend 20 to 25 minutes. Peter will cue me with questions as we go through, in addition to having an open Q&A at the end of the briefing. I think, we're all feeling this right now. This is uniform. Obviously, we're having a meeting over VTC, which we've all gotten used to. And between the economy, the uncertainty of the violence in our streets, and COVID, there's just an enormous amount of uncertainty across the board. And travel and what you do in your personal life, I think, is top of mind for all of us. So as I go through this, I do have my Intel team backing me up here. Barbara, if I have to, I'm going to ask you to unmute Michael Ballard throughout this, if you can do that, as he might have some insight beyond what I have in addition. As we go through this, we are going to look at travel, the U.S. security situation itself, what reopening looks like and some of those considerations for all of us, and then a Q&A as we go through. About Global Gardian, Peter did a nice intro. Thank you. If you don't know who we are, please go to the website. We service the Fortune 500 and family offices primarily. We don't do government work, although we're here in Washington, D.C. What we're finding and have had a surge in is armed agents, safe room construction, cyber since February. Of course, everybody working from home, there's been an enormous amount of cyber. COVID reopenings, sales of PPE or protective equipment, and over 3,000 Americans were evacuated over about a 7-week period once this really got going in March all the way through May. So it's been a very busy period for us, and I don't see it stopping anytime soon. So as we look at this, I want to just set the table. And I'll say this is not weaponized. This is not political. This is a very apolitical look at this. A lot of this does get weaponized as we go through, but I've been using this slide since March. Now disregard the numbers because all that's changed. What has been incredibly accurate statistically and where this started with the pandemic that leads to the global financial crisis, and then of course what's going on with the social fabric of our country is we think, and Mike's on board here, we're straddling between stage 4 and 5 of new growth and stretching the health system, which has gone from New York and California exploding, and now parts of the South between Florida, Texas, and Arizona, for example, are all seeing spikes. So I think that there's no one answer here. This is literally city by city, country by country, state by state, where we're at. What's undeniable data-wise is this has had a massive effect on a global basis. And it's closed down borders, it's closed down airspace, and then, of course, we've got the new issue with the protests. So all of this leads to a lot of uncertainty across the board. We think that we'll get to stage 5 by the fall. And then depending if we get this semi under control, you'll really start to see both the United States and the globe start to wake up. In the interim, make no mistake that we do see desperate people doing desperate things. And it's part of the landscape we're in now across the world. As you look at this, I'm 52 years old. The simplest way I can put this to you is I've never seen the United States more at odds over its politics, its race, its religion, or its sexuality. It is what it is. And the question is, as you view what's going on, how do you secure your business? How do you secure your family? Should be top of mind. I'm sure it is for most of you. The protests and unrest. Mike, you want to comment on this, please?
Yeah, so I'll just say that, last probably 15, 16 days, we've seen the protests and the unrest spread from Minneapolis, where the George Floyd incident took place, all the way from Los Angeles to New York City. A lot of initial violence, met with even more probably escalation from police, National Guard, riot squads, SWAT teams, etc. Sort of mob mentality taking over. You have this confluence of events. It's not just anti-police brutality sentiment. You've got 40 million people unemployed. Folks have nothing better to do in some of these cases. They're getting more and more desperate. Some of the aid, so the COVID-related aid is running out. So you've got a lot of things going on, stark partisan divide, as we mentioned. So you see these all across the country, sort of unprecedented levels of protests across the country. The trend has been slowly getting better as far as the peaceful nature of them. You see police departments are sort of realizing that being, you can't really put out fire with fire in some of these instances. So let people get some of their anger out. Most folks will go home. You've got some troublemakers left over after curfew, and you try and deal with them as you can. So we actually had some folks in Houston who were concerned about the memorial service for George Floyd, and they were thinking, all right, thousands of people are going to be here. It's going to be chaos. I need armed guards at my place. A couple of days later, they kind of get cold feet. They see that, hey, things are not as bad as they have been. They're seem to be getting better. Houston's doing a pretty good job. We said, hey, anything can happen here. All it takes is one bad move by somebody on either side of the line, and things can go south. And then you see a couple days ago what happened in Atlanta. Another guy gets killed by the police. Things go crazy all over again. And Atlanta was one of the cities that saw some pretty bad unrest, some bad violence. There was de-escalation, and now all of a sudden you've got it sparking back up again. Chief of police, I think, was fired over this. So, even though things are maybe getting better, the underlying tensions are still there. The underlying causes for all this unrest and the sort of latent anger is still there. So all it takes is another incident in any city or town, especially if it gets caught on camera and thrown up over Twitter and Facebook. You see something blow up again. So just because things are looking a bit better doesn't mean that we can't see this sort of happen all over again. So I would just sort of caution people to stay vigilant. Don't think that you kind of need to disregard what's been happening similar with COVID, just because there's sort of quarantine fatigue doesn't mean that the virus is still out there and getting worse in many cases.
Okay. And this translates obviously into the global structure of what's happening on travel. So as you look at this on international travel, this is what we're seeing. Obviously, the travel restrictions are real. It's global. We have a database that updates us in real time that Mike and the Intel team oversee. We think a lot of this, for example, in Europe will remain in place through August. Now, Europe, for example, is looking inward right now. So if you're in Italy and you're coming from a European country, you can travel Italy right now. But Italy hasn't opened it up to the United States yet. We think it's coming. And I think Italy depends on tourist dollars so much, you'll see that pressure economically come in. As you look at what's going from at the bottom, navigating airport and flying, we're viewing this from the time you leave your house. How do you get to the airport? What happens when you get to the airport? What happens when you arrive at your arrival host nation country? And what are all those policies? And I think, we were briefing this 2-3 months ago. This was theory. What I would tell all of you today is it's no longer theory. These things are happening. So airlines are asking you to bring your own mask. And for the last about a month, they've been providing masks in most cases. As of this morning, they're putting it out that they might be turning people away if they don't wear a mask at the airport. We're heading in that direction because of the expense of buying that much personal protective equipment is starting to kick in. The TSA has started screening in 12 high volume international airports in the United States. We expect that will get bigger, but the TSA is bureaucratic. It's slow. I would equate this to what happened after 9/11. It took 3 years for the TSA to really understand and get its policies and procedures in place, and now it's too big and it's dysfunctional. But I think that reality is coming. I do think that you will have pre-boarding testing. I think you're going to have the option in some airports, you'll have a no-touch check-in at the parking lot. You'll turn your bags in the parking lot to create space so that you're not having everyone congregate in the terminal. It's not there yet, but it's probably coming. I do think more biometrics are being used, international flights already. The question is, does that now apply to US domestic flights? I think it's coming. I think this concept of an immunity passport, meaning within 24 to 40 hours prior to going to Kenya, when you arrive in Kenya, you're going to have an immunity passport that shows you were tested and you were negative prior to arriving, because Kenya and most African countries will not be able to afford to test everyone or have thermal screening at scale, whereas the West will. And I think that's where that's going. I think there are already immunity passport business popping up in international airports and US airports right now. I think airborne air filtration systems will get better. That'll continue as technology gets better. Delta Airlines, for example, announced 3 weeks ago, 60% max capacity airplanes, no middle seat. You're no longer going to get served a drink. You're going to pick it up. It's all touchless. All of that is no longer theory. It's real. It's being executed right now. What's not on the slide? Our clients, and probably your clients, potentially are interested in still getting in travel. They want to travel this summer. So an example of where there is loosening, right now you can travel to the Virgin Islands, US, British Virgin Islands, no problem. You can go to St. Lucia. You can go to Jamaica starting in 2 weeks. The Bahamas opens on 1 July. Bermuda opens on 1 July. Aruba opens on 10 July. Puerto Rico and the Turks and Caicos will be open on 15 July. The Maldives will receive a private jet and a yacht right now, private. We think Europe, again, is probably August. Cabo will open up in July. Turkey will open up in July. So all of this indicates there are going to be opportunities, but you've got to be careful. It just is what it is as we go through. And again, if any of that kind of data, if you want real-time reporting, we're happy to support. How do we get back to normal, both in your family life and as a business? What does that look like? all of you don't need to kind of go through this in detail. This is our new reality. We as a business are open. We're completely separated. Everybody is masked up. I'm not wearing it because I'm obviously briefing you. This is real. And I think obviously you're seeing the struggles at the bottom of the states opening up bars and restaurants and cafes and so on and so forth. You're watching that in real time. And every state and every city are different, and that's not going to change. And right now there's no real federal standard. It really is up to the states. As you look at this, the one thing that we've seen with businesses, and we're helping businesses reopen. We're helping cities reopen right now with policy and screening and protocol. All of those things are happening. The one thing that I would plant to all of you, if you're running businesses, which I assume most of you are, is this concept of consent. Denton's law firm, the largest law firm in the world, is a large client of ours and a partner. We have partnered on building consent on what that legal liability and exposure looks like. So as you're starting to stand your businesses up, of course, you're going to screen and you're going to figure out how you're going to do that, and you're going to figure out what your policy is and so on and so forth. At this point, that's a given, and we can help with all that. The biggest thing we're seeing that's lacking, though, is this acknowledgement that if you want to minimize your exposure, you've got to get your employees to consent to what you're doing. And we can help with that, but I think it's worth planting that seed. That matters. And it is part of this reopening of what that checklist looks like and what you're asking your employees to do. You kind of, again, I won't go into the massive regurgitation of the medical guidance. All of this, I think, is very transparent and top of mind. The one thing I would highlight here is bullet number 2. As you go through this, you do need to consider the age of certain employees, and without going into their personal information, what ailments they might have, and ask people to simply say, without disclosing what it is, if they have an ailment, that's a real consideration. If they're in their 60s and have a medical issue, you need to think about whether you ask them to come back until we have a vaccine, and that's a real consideration. And if they do decide to come back, again, it's got to be under, you've got to get their consent. Cyber, working from home. We're all on a VTC right now. This has become the norm. We've all become very comfortable with MS Teams and Zoom and having meetings like this. That being said, we've seen a massive spike in cybercrime. With everybody working from home, these platforms are not secure. So the question is, has anybody done a hard look at your router in your home? Have you looked at and thought about who is monitoring the VPN that I'm signed up for? Is it monitored in real time? How am I connecting to Wi-Fi? Does my Wi-Fi go to the apartment or condo above me or out to the street in the house next to me? All those things are now factors in a way they weren't. And this is why we're seeing massive amounts of cyber hacking. And we're seeing not only the home computer be taken over, we're seeing cameras being taken over. We're seeing account data being taken over, which is now translating back into the business as we're all starting to go back in. So it's real and it's worth thinking about. And then lastly, before we open this thing up to Q&A, we're into hurricane season. And this goes back to the travel. If you're going to go into the Caribbean over the next 3-4 months, this is a factor. As you look at this, the ocean is warm this year. They are projecting 13 to 19 storms. The average is 12, that top bullet there. So we expect a very active hurricane season. We've already had our first hit through Louisiana, although it didn't do a lot of damage. It's really early in the season to see a storm like that come through the Gulf. So we do think this is very real, and it should be part of your calculus if you have a vacation home or you plan on going into those parts of the world that are high probability historically of having hurricanes. What we're seeing people not think about. Because of COVID, let's say you're in the Caribbean, or you're in Louisiana, or you're in Florida, these historically high volume sites for hurricanes. Because of COVID, the airlines, the commercial airlines, there's about a quarter of the flights that used to be out there. So what we're telling people is be on the safe side. Don't wait to evac, because there aren't hundreds to thousands of seats the way there would have been if you were coming out of Puerto Rico, you could have gotten out within that last 72 hours relatively easy. That's not going to be there this year. And it's a real consideration on timing of coming out, if you will. Thinking about if you have businesses that are in the path of these storms, who is key and essential, and pulling that trigger to get non-essential people out of the way of the storm is more essential than ever before. No question about it as you think about that. Understand that because the global supply chain is under duress right now, your recovery, nails, plywood, drywall, the people, fuel, bringing in ships, bringing in access to materials, if they're in remote locations, will be slower than ever before. If you thought the recovery of the panhandle of Florida, South Florida, Houston, and or any of the Virgin Islands or Puerto Rico was slow 3 years ago, it's going to be worse this year because the supplies aren't there and the ability to get things there aren't there the way they were in the past. So all of these things matter more than ever. And as we always say, desperate people do desperate things. Puerto Rico never recovered, never fully recovered. You already have an entire population that's under duress. If they get hit again, it's really going to be ugly, and desperate people will do desperate things. So we'll pause there. A couple of things. We don't think that we really come back to quote unquote normal until there's a full vaccine, and that vaccine has penetrated the West and we start to feel secure about it. No one knows when that's going to happen, and it is not guaranteed that we will have a vaccine. So this new normal, I would plan on being around for a while. I do think by fall, hopefully, we have this under control enough to feel like we can function again at a higher level than we do today. I do think, obviously, if you're in the financial sector, you're seeing what's happening with the economy. There are tidbits of good news, and I think that will continue through the fall, and then we'll have to see where we're at. In the short term, I think the new normal of having to operate with masks and social distancing and seeing the 40 million people that are unemployed, when those government programs start to run out, we're going to see more desperation, which means we will see increases in crime and serious crime across the U.S. And if you do travel abroad to places like Europe and the Caribbean, you're going to have to be more mindful of your personal situation and your environment. So we'll pause there. Peter, hopefully we've got enough questions and enough time to pause and take Q&A across the board.
You're on mute, Peter.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Peter.
I did it again. Sorry about that. Anyway, I've got a question from Julie. For domestic travel, do you recommend driving over flying?
So it depends on what is this for. Is this for a business transaction or a family? I would say that as long as you take the appropriate precautions, in addition to what the airlines are now mandating, it is relatively safe to fly. That being said, if this is not a business transaction where there are $1 million on the line and you have to build trust with a client or for an acquisition or a merger or whatever the case might be, if this is a family vacation and it's within a day or less of travel, I would absolutely drive. If this is something that's timely and there's lots of financial, associated outcomes that have a financial, what's the right? My apologies.
Fact.
If it's an effect that's financial important to you, then I would take the appropriate precautions and I would fly. And hopefully that gives you a good sense of, how we would view this. Is it key and essential? And if so, then I would fly. And if it's not, then I would drive.
Very good. Question from James. Would like to know your thoughts on China-U.S. relationship and tensions in the East?
Yeah. Mike, you want to start with this?
I can jump in a little about that. So the big thing that we're looking at, obviously, China and the U.S. have had a pretty tenuous relationship since Trump took office, but it's always been a little bit tense with all the intellectual property theft and sort of arbitrary detainment. The big thing we're looking at is what's going to be happening in Hong Kong with this new national security law. It's basically going to let Chinese intelligence agencies and security apparatus into Hong Kong. It'll no longer be an autonomous region. You'll see the same sorts of things like searching people's cell phones, laptops, no expectation of electronic privacy when you're traveling there, arbitrary detainment for questioning, either, thoughts that people are legitimately spies or looking at them as, from a corporate espionage perspective. So we don't see the relationship getting any better. Even if Biden takes office, I don't think the relationship is going to be all that better. And I think a lot of the financial and sort of geopolitical power that was in Hong Kong is going to shift probably to Singapore, which is probably the next best spot in the region. So overall, we're a little bit probably pessimistic, I think, on China-US.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Another question here. Do you think the global mergers and acquisitions market is going to be better or worse due to COVID-19?
I think that depends on what the industry is. So I think obviously there's already been consolidation has already started. We're seeing that with our own client base. And just to give you a sense of this, Blackstone is a client, Goldman Sachs a client, JP Morgan's a client, and a series of hedge funds and private equity firms coast to coast are clients. So we're hearing chatter that we're already starting to talk to different businesses. I think it really does depend on the industry of what's going on. So there's no clean answer to that. It will depend on who are the big players, who's going to survive, and who's going to gobble up the small players that simply can't survive. In other industries, whether if you're in the bleach industry, if you're in the mask or PPE industry, those businesses are booming, and there's no reason to think you're going to see lots of consolidation in those markets, where you might see a U.S. airline fall this year, and there could be consolidation in the airline market. You're already seeing lots of consolidation in the oil and gas market. That's been going on, for the last 3 years, and it continues. I just think it depends on the market.
Okay, thank you. A question from Steve. What are your thoughts regarding steps to take for at-home security for a family from threats of civil unrest in one's neighborhood?
Yep. So we're tonight, just so you have a sense of this, Peter, if you're in Denver, I'm not sure where you're at. We are deploying 17 armed agents into Denver right now for a business and a couple of families with dogs. And then we're taking over the camera feeds. So this is top of mind right now. We have deployed more armed agents in the last month than I think, other than the hurricanes, than we ever have. And this is across the United States and in most major cities. So we're seeing for families, one, they don't want the Ring or ADT camera surveillance because it's garbage. They know it's garbage. And I think people want a real solution. Two, I think when you have rioting close to your home, we've brought in a lot of armed agents for families or their family offices because they are in that zone where they could have protests 2 blocks away, 3 blocks away. They want someone there around the clock to get them through this period. We've seen a lot of people now. We've now got more proposals for safe rooms and satellite communication, because if the grid goes down, if the phone and the computer systems go down and there's no way to communicate, people want an alternate, which is the only alternate is satellite devices. So all of those things, in addition to weapons training and stocking up on food in case they've got to be isolated for anywhere between 3 to 2 weeks, all of those things are top of mind right now. So as families, those are the things that we're seeing demand for, and those are the things that we're deploying for. Obviously, New York, Seattle, Los Angeles, Chicago, Dallas, and to Mike's point, Houston during the Memorial Week have all been just surging for us. And now Denver, we're seeing tonight 17 agents, multiple dogs, and we're taking over an entire camera surveillance system with real monitoring. All of those things apply to families.
Wow, interesting. Marcia says, what is your opinion on travel to Mexico?
Yeah, Mike, you want to address?
I would not go personally. Mexico has got pretty high daily rate of infections, and they are not testing at anywhere near the capacity of other developed nations, and they're actually hiding a lot of what's happening there. So, I mean, if you, you know, 1 day trip over the border and you're careful into, you know, from El Paso or something, maybe, but I wouldn't go to Mexico City at all. I wouldn't go to any of the bigger cities. I probably still wouldn't go on vacation there. There's just so much uncertainty. You know, they're basically on the same path as Brazil. And if you've been looking at any of their data, they're at 1 million cases, at least 1 million cases known, and, you know, 50,000 deaths. And those two countries in India are going to be, they're going to end up with more cases and more deaths than the U.S., I think, in the next 3 to 6 months. So I would avoid Mexico at this point.
All right, thanks, Mike. Hey, Dale, there's a lot of information out there. We know there's a lot of misinformation out there. We don't know what the misinformation is. How do we sort through that?
Yep. So I'll start, and I'll let Mike comment on this if he thinks I'm off, because Mike is our director of intelligence, has a whole team working for him, and has over 200 different feeds of information around the world going into this and what we put out every day. I would simply say this. I think that, again, knowing that everything in our lives is now kind of being weaponized, the only way that we look at is data, and we're trying to be apolitical. We don't want information sources that are politicized. So we're trying to avoid any data source that could be weaponized. And this is really, really important, which means, you know, of course, there are people that are trying to weaponize the data from the WHO, the CDC, other organizations like that. That being said, guys like Mike and those intel analysts that work for him, they're still going to go to those sites. And we think that those are still your best baseline, right? Because there's good people there, there's smart people there. They are putting out good data that's based on science. And the collection of information of where cases are, what's flowing, what crime rates are, what kidnapping rates are, all those things still apply. And the key here is to decipher through, just disregard things that could be the optic of it politicized, and look for the hard data. Mike, do you want to comment on that, because you live this every day?
Yeah, I mean, misinformation is one of the big ones. You know, it's easy to get sucked into the rabbit holes on this stuff on Twitter, and you know, everyone is apparently a doctor now, and a epidemiologist, and a virologist. So you want to make sure you're sticking to typically trusted sources, like Dale mentioned. You want to be aware that there are a lot of state-owned media outlets out there. You know, Russia Today, RT, is a Russian state outlet. Xinhua, and there's multiple Chinese news outlets that are basically just state mouthpieces. So just be wary of those sources, or anyone who's quoted in any of those sources, because it's always going to have some ulterior motive.
And the other comment I would is, look, there's lots of firms like ours. We put out every day for free. We don't charge for that. You can go to our website and go to the newsroom, and Mike's team is churning out global intel briefs to include the United States and abroad. There are months worth of work there. You can see trend lines across the board, and you'll see that all of our reporting is right down the middle. We're not right, we're not left. Frankly, we don't care. We're just focused on the data. And I think that's the source you're looking for, or the kind of source you're looking for.
All right, thank you. Numerous people have asked me about, or suggested that we have to be careful about losing our freedoms in this process, and potentially permanently losing our freedoms. What thoughts do you have about that?
Yeah, and I'm going to answer this very directly. And again, this is hard because we're in an environment that's just so politicized. So people will beat me up for this answer. I literally, you know, I've by putting myself out there on this, I'll take some shots, because inevitably parts of the audience think in political terms, and we're simply just trying not to do that. That being said, I served on active duty for 24 years as a special forces officer. I've lived and operated in over 70 countries around the world. I would consider myself a patriot who, and don't take this the wrong way, I have killed for this nation, literally. So when I answer this question, I'm answering it from that place. I literally put myself out there and have killed for the nation. So knowing that, I still will be criticized for this, but I would say this. I think that I'm 52 years old. As I stated earlier, I've never seen the nation more at odds with its politics, with its race, with its sexuality, with our religion. It's just brutal. So as we go through this, I think that being asked to wear a mask and not infect the person next to you, if you're asymptomatic and you don't know you have it, which is happening every day by the thousands, that is not infringing on your freedom right now. If you want to go to an event and they screen you and they take your temperature, with the current situation, we're almost at 500,000 people globally dead from this. That's undeniable. So I think knowing that, taking these precautions, I think, yes, the government, state by state, governor by governor, some went too far, some didn't go far enough. And here's reality. Right now, the federal government made a decision. I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong, but the decision was, we are not going to lead from the top and dictate down what a countrywide policy should be. It was disseminated down to be basically managed locally, right or wrong. That's where we're at. That being said, some went too far, some didn't go far enough, and they're gonna take beatings whether they went too far or they didn't go far enough. My response to all of you, or my guidance is, there's a middle ground here. There is common sense that says you shouldn't be offended by some basic protections and some basic actions. And if you think that being asked to wear a mask or not go to a concert is infringing on your freedom, then I would tell you that this is a small snapshot in time. In an ideal world, we do get a vaccine next year. It's disseminated. We get this under control and we go back to normal. In the interim, I would think that common sense, not politicized, not weaponized, common sense would dictate to you that no one is trying to take your freedom, because we don't want more people to get sick and die, which is an undeniable fact. So it's a really hard question. There is no right answer. My answer is common sense, disregard the extremes on both sides, find the middle ground and live your life.
Well, hopefully we have a lot of common sense then.
Yes, sir. In that conversation with Aspen, I got beat up. One of the families in the audience said, give me life or give me liberty. Right now, until we get control of this, give me life. So yeah. I'm okay with being screened. I'm okay with social distancing. I'm okay with letting my business work from home, at some level, until we know more. And I thought that answer was really, really valuable. And another guy said, Dale, I can't believe you served and you're trampling all over the Constitution. And I just said, sir, I think, extreme circumstances dictate an extreme answer. And right now we're in pretty extreme circumstances. So I think common sense has to prevail. I don't want to be, I don't want to trample on anybody's freedom. And I certainly don't want to live where I feel like I'm in a box. At the same time, I don't want to get the guy next to me sick, and I don't want to get my grandparents sick when I go to visit them. And I think there's a middle ground here, and get rid of the politicization and get rid of the weaponization of these messages. That's what I would say.
All right, thank you. This question is for Mike, and actually there are two questions regarding travel. One's about Australia and New Zealand, and the other is about Rwanda in the fall.
Yeah, so I PM'd McDermott there. So New Zealand, I don't think is going to open up to foreign travelers until there's a vaccine, period. I think they've taken a very strong approach to it. I mean, it's relatively easy. You're a small population. You're an island. You can cut travelers off, get it under control, which they have done. So once there's a vaccine, they're going to vaccinate all their folks. And then you can say, hey, anyone wants to visit here, they can. So until that happens, they're not going to open up. Australia is taking a similar tack. They are not as able to do what New Zealand did, but they're banning foreigners until at least 17 September. My guess is that gets extended. They may say, hey, if you're coming from New Zealand, you can travel here. But then if you're going to try and travel back to New Zealand, you got to quarantine, is my guess. So I would not be optimistic about Australia opening up for foreign travel anytime soon. And then Rwanda, case by case, I don't know too much about the situation in that particular country. Most of Africa is sort of shutting their borders. So at this point, I probably would not. I would not necessarily plan on that unless it's a essential trip.
Very good. Thanks, Mike. Dale, a question for you.
On Rwanda, Peter, real quick.
Yeah.
Mike has got this global database. If that traveler, your client, or whoever's in the audience that asked about Rwanda needs some very specific data, we can send you a full report on where they're at today. And then let's see what Mike says about trends, but we're happy to support that kind of data, no charge, we're happy to share.
Excellent, excellent. The WHO or WHO has come under fire a lot. Is it legitimate?
Mike?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer. I mean, there's always going to be, if you're an international organization, you rely on funding from a variety of governments. You're always sort of treading that line, right? If you're a nonprofit, you have a certain base that you're catering to. You don't want to sort of anger folks who pay your electric bill. So I would still probably trust what they're saying. I think the goof recently with talking about asymptomatic spread being very rare, they kind of walked that back. Part of it was taken out of context. I think the U.S. withdrawing its sort of support was not necessarily a good move. It only puts more emphasis on Chinese influence in the WHO. But it may be time for a whole new, redoing of that system. But for now, I'm more sticking to the regional kind of the CDC of whichever country you're looking at is sort of how I would spend my time researching.
Very good. Dale, you've protected our country for many years in many aspects, and I've heard people suggest that this creates a greater risk to our country's freedoms and our safety as a country, not just as individuals. Is that fair?
Yeah, say that last part again, Peter.
Insurgents and terrorism tends to pick up during times of crisis. Should we be more concerned about those kinds of things or the safety of our country in general?
Yeah, so two-part answer. Number one, and Michael back me up on this and I'll let him comment. I think clearly whenever you have crisis, whenever you have vulnerability, and we're talking geopolitics, the world here, I think that our adversaries will absolutely, positively try and take advantage of it. And I think that the rift between the WHO, the United States, with China and the influence and all the politicization of that's an example of China's going to try and take advantage of this, create enough uncertainty around it, and we respond and we pull out, and now they have more influence. It's a simple example of an adversary taking advantage of the situation. And look, I think China's expanding, island occupation. I think they're expanding their influence into different parts of Asia. They're accelerating things. I think Russia will try and take advantage of all this chaos in Europe. I just think that's the nature of geopolitics in the world we are in. And I think obviously every time the United States financially has a depression, or we have, the 2008 crisis, we have downturns based on war and 9/11, and now what we're living with COVID. Whenever we are weakened in any way, our adversaries are absolutely going to try and take advantage of that. I don't think there's any denying that. So at a macro level, I think that's very real. And I think obviously, there's lots of arguments about our deficit and what do we do with that, and does it matter, does it not matter? I think ultimately it will matter. And I think that pressure that others can take advantage of this to a certain degree is another example of taking advantage of the nation. Within the country itself, I think that obviously it still remains, the United States is still the most powerful nation on the globe. I still believe that if and when there is a vaccine, we will find a way to manufacture it at scale. We will take care of the country. We'll do this at scale. We'll get it done. And I think we'll find a way to move on. In the interim, I think obviously we're struggling internally with all of this, and it's creating a lot of friction. And I think we should all be concerned for our country. Like that's natural. And we should, because we have three very hot topics right now between what's happening with COVID, what's happening economically, and what's happening with the conversation about race and religion and politics and everything else. We haven't seen this kind of anxiety in a long time. And I think we should all be concerned about it. At the same time, if we can get through Ebola, if we can manage AIDS, if we can get through yellow fever, if we can get through, the Great Depression, if we can get through both world wars, we can get through 9/11, we're resilient. And there's enough depth in our systems, and our system of government is not going to let one side go too far, go the other. The pendulum always swings. The system is brilliant in that it always finds a way back to the middle. And common sense will find a way back to the middle. So no matter what extremes you believe in, no matter where you think we're on the pendulum, the system's always going to come back. And I think we'll find our way through this. And 5 years from now, we'll look back and say, yep, it was horrible. And financially, it was very desperate. And we had 40 million Americans unemployed, and it felt bleak. But the sun it'll come out again. And we're going to move on as a nation. And we will find our way through this, just like we found our way through all those other crises. And I think that optimism in the back of your mind, you have to believe this in the system, finding that middle. And I think you have to find and believe there's enough smart people in the country that we're going to find our way through this economically, politically, religiously, sexuality, all these things. We're going to find our way through it.
Well, it sure is nice to have some optimism when the media is certainly telling us otherwise. Got a question here that says, can you discuss the situation between North and South Korea and the near-term implications to the Asia region?
Mike, you want to?
Yeah, I can jump on that. So I think it was yesterday or earlier this morning, North Korea literally blew up this joint liaison office that they had right near the border. They're sort of, they do this every so often where they'll have this sort of grand gesture where they'll do something like this, try and get a little bit of attention back. No one knows what's going on there as far as COVID's concerned. They say that there's essentially no cases, which is not true. I mean, the North and South Korean situation has been going on for, 60 plus years now. A lot of it is really just for show. There were a lot of questions about what was going on with Kim there. Was he dead? Was he gravely ill? Was his sister in charge? There's a lot of unknowns there just because of how secretive that country is. But China keeps a relatively tight leash on North Korea. And as long as it's sort of in China's best interest not to have a full-blown conflict there, I think you'll still have missile testing. You'll still have sort of border skirmishes like what we see between China and India lately. But it doesn't necessarily concern me as much as the media would portray it.
Interesting. Thank you,
Peter,
Mike.
let me make one comment on North Korea, because it's a very simple question, but it's loaded. It's a loaded answer. And I say this on stage in front of a lot of people every year. And I've served in South Korea. I've never been in North Korea. Here's the question all of you have to ask yourself. Who wins by going to war? If North Korea offensively bombs South Korea, it is guaranteed mutual destruction. The South will counterfire. The United States will bring in bombers from Guam and Japan. We will bomb Northern Korea until it is literally a parking lot and nothing's left. Then we and the South Koreans are going to march north, and the Chinese are going to march south, and we're going to have another demilitarized zone, and we're going to have another conflict potentially between China and the U.S. No one wants this. If all of us on this phone call right now are in the top 5% of the government in North Korea, we travel to Europe in the summer, we eat Western food, we watch Western movies, we live a really good life, believe it or not. If you're in that position, why in the world would you ever risk all of that? Because it is guaranteed, once it starts, they do not survive. And then the secondary is we might go to war with China, which China doesn't want. They're not ready yet. Someday they're going to be ready to go to war with us, but we're not there yet. So the question is, who wins from going to war? We would affect the second largest economy in the world, the 11th largest economy in the world, and the third largest economy in the world by going to war, and no one wins. So bar Kim literally being crazy, which is possible, but unlikely, I think this is another example of our adversaries trying to take advantage. The world is under duress. Economically, we're in a bad spot. Kim can feel right now, he can rattle that saber and do things that are very provocative to create leverage. But ultimately going to war, I agree with Mike. I don't see them going to war. I think he's going to do what he does, and he's going to try and create leverage and rattle the saber and try and put himself in a position to get more rice in the winter when they're starving. I think that's the reality of it. Bar him going crazy, we're not going to war because no one wins. Nobody. China loses, we lose, they lose. We all lose by going to war.
It's been said that wars are going to be fought differently going into the future. We've seen trade wars for the last few years. Is that how we're going to see countries fight against each other these days and into the future?
No question. Mike, I'll let you back me up on this. I think, look, if you're Russia and you look back in 1991 when we went in the Persian Gulf 1, Russia had no idea that we had stealth bombers. They had no idea we had these JDAM bombs that you can literally program to go through a window. Perfect precision. We intercepted communiques from the Russian military back to Moscow and back to the government that said, if we would have went to war with the US, we would have lost in less than a week. Other than China in the future, and they're not even ready for it yet, but they will be. Right now, there's not a single country in the world that can take us on physically. In a kinetic war, no one can beat us. So why would any country in the world take us on militarily? We've just proven it over and over and over. So now there's three wonderful ways to come after the U.S. in a war without it being kinetic, physical. Number one is cyber. Number two is using cyber to influence the politics and sentiment of your population. And three is economically. Those three ways of going to war are now the future wars, other than the day that we, the United States, are economically, we can't physically maintain the largest, most powerful military in the world, which someday it's coming. And China is so big and so powerful, they can build a bigger physical Army, Navy, Marine Corps, blah, 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 and they can beat us in the future. That's when you'll have a physical war. But in the interim, it's cyber, it's weaponizing politics, and it's economic warfare. Those are the ways of war in the near future. And until China is big enough to take us on physically, which we've still got a ways to go, that's the next large physical war you're going to see.
Let's hope we have a long ways to go. Have a question about air travel. Will the airplanes be reconfigured since no one's going to be sitting in the middle seat? Will travel be more comfortable?
So this is up for debate. My answer is this. In the short term, no. You might see it on an airlines like Emirates, where they can afford to pull all the middle seats. They can afford, right now they're advertising, if you fly Emirates, they'll give you a head to toe outfit, literally booties, a full plastic outfit, a face shield, everything. And I think obviously they're going to separate folks out. I think airlines like that are states, government sponsored, they could, depending on how long this goes. So in the short term, Delta Airlines is just not going to sell the middle seat. They're not going to physically remove it just yet. If we don't start to see a vaccine, whether you believe it's going to come out of Oxford next, or it's going to come out of somewhere else, because they're ahead of us right now, is what everybody's banking their hopes on. But if we don't see this in the next 9 months, and if 9 months or less, we don't feel confident this is coming. A real vaccine is coming. At that point, if this goes past 9 to 12 months and we're still sitting where we're at now, and we're not confident there's a real vaccine that's going to be globally deployed, that's when you'll see airlines actually physically moving chairs and pulling them out and building a business class and first class, which do have more room and more space and things like that. There might be a few airlines that can afford it that are state sponsored in the short term, but until we get past this kind of window where there's optimism, we are going to see a vaccine. Till we get to that point where that remains uncertain after another 6, 9, 12 months, you won't see them physically repurpose the airplanes at scale just yet. I don't think.
Interesting. Thank you. Another question around air travel. Should we wear goggles? This is from Pam. Should we wear goggles or a shield on planes?
Mike, you want to answer that, or I can answer it?
Goggles or shields on a plane. I would probably go shield and a face covering is personally how I would do it. Goggles are, I don't know. This is a little bit odd.
Yeah. My simple answer is this: bare minimum, you've got to wear a mask. No doubt about it. I think that if you want to go that extra step, wear a shield. Bring it. They're cheap. They're easily, you can get them on Amazon. You can get them on whatever now. They're widely available. I think if you're going to be in close quarters and you're concerned about your health, depending on your age or depending on what your health might be, every little thing can help. And if you're willing to wear a shield for 3 hours on a flight, you should do it. I think at a minimal, you've got to have the mask, and in an ideal world, the rubber gloves based on touch. And I think the shield is just, you're being very, very cautious, but certainly can't help or can't hurt.
All right. I think it's probably one last question. It's a long one. We'll see how long the answer is. At the moment, most results for PCR and antibody tests come back in minimum 3 to 5 days, and many people say the rapid tests are often inaccurate.
Yep.
Since some foreign countries are requiring negative test results within 72 hours of arrival, do you foresee the testing process being fast-tracked or improved of these new timing requirements? Or is this going to be another issue or backlog that U.S. travelers will have to face in the next 3 to 6 months for international travel?
So here's my answer. It depends on where you're going. If you're going to Europe in the future, or you're going to Hong Kong or Singapore or a nation that is sophisticated and modern, the West, and they can afford to test travelers at scale, I think that, this will only get better. And we're already starting to see signs of this, where if you land in Hong Kong, you land in Vietnam, you're tested on site. If you're negative, you go about your business. You're not quarantined. If you fly to London today, you're quarantined for 14 days. The assumption is this will get better and shorter to the point where we'll have accurate testing in the near future, and you'll go about your business landing in London. That doesn't apply, I don't think, as I started earlier, to poor countries. They can't afford to do this at scale. They don't have the money to do it. So my answer is it depends on where you go. If you're going to the West and they can afford it, this gets better and better every day, every month. If you're going to a poor country, they're never going to get there. The assumption has to be that you're going to have testing within 24, 40, 70 to 72 hours. And that concept of having a passport that is in addition to your normal passport, if you will, I just think that is the norm, and this concept of an immunity passport is real. And it won't change because the onus will be on you to pay for that and get the test because the country won't be able to afford it. So I think it depends on where you're going and where you're going to arrive into.
Thank you, Dale. We do have a couple more questions. We're right at 3. Do you guys have a little more time? Mike, I think
I got to go. Yeah, I got a 9-month-old to help take care of and make dinner and stuff. So thanks for having me. And
Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. Dale, do you have a little more time, or do you need to wrap?
I've got all the time in the world, and I enjoy the Q&A more than anything. So I'm here until you're satisfied.
Okay, very good. Well, Julie says, given the politicization of which state government entities has gotten PPEs, will this translate to the same thing with the vaccine?
Here's my read on this. And again, this is a political answer. I think that when you don't have a solution, you want to push down and create space. And by pushing it down to the states and politicizing it buys you time and space. And, there's room for blame, right or wrong. I think that's just human nature. It's the human condition. That being said, when you have a solution, if you're the administration, I don't care who gets elected in November, if we have a solution next year or sooner, whoever's in charge of the country, if they have a solution, automatically they're going to want to distro across the country, every state, every city, because they're going to want to say, I solved the problem. I got us on the right track. I've now vaccinated the country and we can go back to normal. We can get our economy back and we can get going. I don't think anyone would want to politicize the solution, because the answer creates so much positive momentum economically, and it just takes pressure of all these other issues we're seeing in our country, that I cannot imagine we're going to politicize the solution. It just has too much upside. I think you want to get this solution out there across the board, unlike where you want to create space and create avenues to blame when you don't have a solution.
Very good. Thank you. I have basically the same question from both Leslie and Steve. Any idea when the quarantine will be lifted in Hawaii?
So I think Hawaii is unique. Obviously, they're isolated. They're the equivalent of a small country, right? And you've seen a lot of small countries in places like Singapore and Hong Kong and New Zealand and countries like that are small. They can control what's coming in and out, and they've eradicated this very quickly and done a wonderful job. South Korea is another good example. They've had some spikes, but overall, they're a small country, and they've done all the right things to really get ahead of this. I equate Hawaii, even though it's a U.S. state, in the same like mind of they're out there, and because the federal government didn't put a mandate, a federal standard across the board, Hawaii is acting as its own country right now. And if you were the governor of Hawaii, you'd probably do the same thing. You want to protect the integrity of the islands. So my assumption is Hawaii is not going to open up Hawaii until they feel a little more secure about what's going on in the country, the mainland, excuse me, and frankly, the world. Now, the downside is Hawaii, to a large degree, relies on, tourism dollars so much. It's the number one thing they have is tourism. So by being closed, they are hurting themselves. So I think if you're the governor of Hawaii, you're looking again, you're trying to find the middle ground. When is the risk low enough that I can get my tourist dollars going again? And that's the calculus they're going through. And my sense is we're not there yet. I think once the nation as a whole, once we get Phoenix, once we get Arizona coming down, once we get Louisiana coming down, once we get Texas coming down, once we get Florida, where as a whole, the mainland is either flat or negative, that's when Hawaii opens up. Because Hawaii doesn't want to cut its own, it's because its nose to spite its face. They need those tourism dollars. So I think there's a balancing act there. If I'm the governor of Hawaii, I'm looking for that sweet spot where I feel like the mainland is flat or coming down as a whole, not pockets, not New York, not Connecticut, not Illinois, but the mainland as a whole. As soon as that opens up, I want those tourism dollars, I'm going to open up. So my assumption is today, sitting here, is on the current trajectory, I think by the end of August, mid-September, optimistically, Hawaii will open. Now, could it happen earlier? It could, but I think realistically, we're probably on another, 60 to 90-day timeline until Hawaii opens up. Or they open up, but you've got to have that immunity passport of the testing. There'll be some version of this because they are going to start looking for those dollars on tourism come the summer.
Yeah, it can be quite tricky balancing health with revenue and income.
It's
Question
hard.
around treatments, which also is quite tricky. How reliable are the current treatments, and what's behind the politics of hydroxychloroquine? Also, apparently a new breakthrough in treatment being talked about, dexamethasone.
Yep. So I'll answer this in 2 to 3 pieces. Number one, with treatments. So we, Global Gardian, as a firm, we started selling things and we pivoted like lots of businesses to COVID. So we were never in mobile medical units. We've sold 74 mobile medical units to Amazon and Hilton Hotels and Mosaic, a large phosphate extraction company, where you have mobile units that as hundreds to thousands of people start working again, whether it's manufacturing or an office space, they can bring in their workforce in and out. And if they've got a problem, they can isolate people and treat them and diagnose them and test them and so on and so forth. We were never in the policy building of what would it take to open a building up and what does right look like. But we've turned and become consultants in that way. The one thing that we have not pivoted towards, we've sold millions of masks. We've sold millions of thermometers. We've sold millions of bottles of hand sanitizer. That was never in my core business, ever. The one thing that we have 50 people trying to sell us to pass through into our client base is medical testing. And here's why it's the one thing we have yet to pass through and sell. The data, according to my medical director and my medical team, is that it's too uncertain. There are multiple products that have come out of Europe. Specifically, we have medical partners in London that started selling this stuff back in April. And the reality was the data shows it could be anywhere between 80 to 95% accurate. And the reality is we as a business were not willing to sell a product that was not 99% accurate. And until we see that data and we have a partner that can sell a product that's 99% accurate, we did not want to sell, whether it is to test you, whether you are asymptomatic or you're positive, or if you have the antibodies. Until we see the perfect test, that we see the perfect partner, we're not going to sell that. So I think the reason there's so much kind of lack of confidence, if you will, is the data doesn't show a highly consistent testing, whether you're positive or negative, or if you have the antibodies. There's things being tested, but it's not perfect. So I think on the treatment side, this just creates lots of uncertainty. And I think that's going to continue until we refine this. On the politicization of drugs and treatment, I think that, again, this is human nature. Until we have the solution, the vaccine, there's going to be lots of people that jump in the game. Lots of pharmaceuticals are going to find ways to make money at trying to find a solution, whether they can tout that they've supported and have a 70% increase in treating someone who is sick. That is a business. And anybody who's sick, and there's a drug that's introduced that says 70% of the people that take this drug, it helps. If I'm on the bed and I'm sick and I'm worried about my health, I'm going to take that drug. Yeah. I think because of that, there's just lots of politics around this. And I think it's an indicator of the weaponization of information and data of our entire society. And I don't think that's going away anytime soon. Interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a tricky deal there. Another tricky issue is colleges. I've got a son at Cal Poly. They're not opening the campus. It's going to be online, at least for the first quarter. My daughter's going to TCU, and they're going to be open. Yep. What are the prospects of, in general, colleges opening in the fall?
Yep. This goes back to every state and every city is different. Well, TCU's in Texas. That's why it's going to open, because Texas is taking a very aggressive stance, and they're moving fast. In California, they're not. I think that the university system in general in this country there's a direct correlation between the state policy and the governor and what the universities are going to do. There's a connection there, and mindset and attitude and everything else. I think that, again, my answer is it's going to be state by state, city by city, and college by college. It won't be uniform. Some will be on this extreme, some will be on this extreme, and some will be in the middle. I think here's the answer. You as the parent are the decision maker. I don't think you as the parent should rely on the governor of Texas to decide whether you send your child back to TCU. I think you should have a serious conversation with your child. I think you should look at the data. And if you do decide that you want your child to go back because you don't want to disrupt their education, you don't want them to take a gap year to figure out what's going to happen next, or you don't think the quality of the education or the experience online is good enough. All those are factors. Ultimately, if you as a parent make the decision, yep, I'm gonna allow my child to go back to Texas. I've had a serious conversation. I think you should have a conversation with your child to outline the data, to tell them what you think is acceptable and not, and why. Going back to TCU might be completely acceptable if they act appropriately and take the appropriate the appropriate actions. And if TCU opens up for football games and they open up 50% of the stadium, for example, and they're testing people on the way in and they've got 6 seats between them at the stadium and she's masked up and you feel comfortable with that and she feels comfortable with that, I think you let her go or him go, depending on which child it is. So again, I think these are the answer is it's personal and you're the adult in the room and you should have the final vote where they go and when they go and what they do. And then if they do go back, have a serious conversation about this. And then off to the races they go and they're going to do what they do. And they're college students and you as a parent can only influence them so much. And you should have that knowledge in your heart of hearts that you've analyzed the data, you've sat down with them, you had a serious conversation, you made an adult decision.
Well, thank you, Dale. And yeah, this word unprecedented is almost feels overused, and maybe it is, but it just seems like almost everything you've talked about is unprecedented. Makes me think about the stock market. We lost 37% in the course of a couple of weeks. We were the fastest to a bear market in the history of the stock market. Bear market's 20% or greater decline. Then we saw an increase, an unprecedented increase, about 30%. We're hearing still news about contagion and recontagion, yet stocks are continuing to climb. What I want to tell our clients out there and anybody who's listening is the stock market does not necessarily identify what's happening right now. It identifies what might happen or what's likely or could happen in the future. And when we go back and look at history, we look at crisis, what we have found is the stock market leads the good news by 6 to 12 months. So 6 to 12 months out, perhaps we are in much better shape economically, because that is a bellwether predictor potentially of what the economy is likely to look like. That said, we got clients who are saying, should I get out and wait? Or how do I make this portfolio more conservative? There are ways to do that without taking your money off the table. Currently, we're embarking on a program called with structured notes, which allow our clients' investment to go down as much as 30 to 40%. And if it doesn't go down lower than the 30 or 40% in the course of the term of the note, they get their money back. So there are ways to be participating in the stock market without taking the same kind of risk that investors have been taking or feel like they're taking during these unprecedented times. Dale, fabulous talk. Thank you so much for the information you provided us. Really appreciate it. Thank you all for being here. We're going to do another presentation 2 weeks from now. Barbie, I think you've got a slide that shows what's coming up. Many of you know the name Vic Lombardi. He was a Channel 4 sports reporter for a long time. He's 2 weeks from now, 11 a.m., not 2 p.m., 11 a.m. sports in the time of COVID, as we start seeing sports opening up. And I guess we've seen some PGA tournaments. Basketball is going to be played without a crowd, without an audience. Then we also have Greg Moore. He's going to be talking about police and black folks. He wrote an article in the Sun, Colorado Sun, a couple weeks ago. I picked up on that, called him, and he said he'd be delighted. And then a real coup, we've got John Hickenlooper, former mayor of Denver and former governor of Colorado, will be speaking. We don't have dates for either of those at this time. But stay tuned. Keep an eye on your emails. Barbie will be sending out invitations. We'd love to see future presentations. And again, thank you all very much. Bye-bye.